Solutions. So I've obviously been talking about solutions this entire time. It's very difficult to talk about what the problems are without talking about some additional solutions that they have. Now, one big solution that we happen to have is called positive youth development programs. Now, these are programs that they provide supports to emerging adults to kind of foster self-efficacy. Their goal is to work on a very individual basis with each of the emerging adults to see what they need and to see if they can provide some resources for this particular thing. In addition to this, they really try to take a lot of factors into consideration. They try to help create a positive identity, reinforce pro-social norms, as well as gaining social, emotional, and behavioral competence. And this is what I meant by it was really difficult to, which is why I've been talking about solutions the entire time, because by talking about the fact that they, people in emerging adulthood lack a strong sense of adult identity, you're providing a solution at the same time, which is to help them garner a sense of identity. And these positive youth development programs do that very thing. Now, one of the important parts of these programs is that instead of targeting risk factors, which is very easy to do, to be very, very problem focused, instead it focuses more on hope. Something the youth needs plenty of. Remember, a lot of people going through emerging adulthood may not even have a dream, or if they do have a dream, it may look completely hopeless. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one that has heard that young people don't think that they can buy a house because house prices have gone up so much. And that's very perceptual. At this point, millennials are buying houses at the exact same rates as all their previous generations at the same age. But when they have that perception of hopelessness, the idea of focusing on hope instead of the problems that they have can be very powerful for that particular young person. They try to enhance the assets that the young person has and the protective factors, both emotionally and physically. They want to focus more on empowerment, which obviously is something that the young adult does not have a lot of. The really effective programs include that individual approach that I was speaking of, helping the people to identify and reach specific goals. Very similar to how just standard therapy might be. We need them to envision a positive future identity, which means not just Levinson's theory of dreams, but a dream for who they are as well, so that they can think, who do I want to be by the time I'm 40, and how do I become that particular person? These goals and identity formation will give a sense of purpose and create those feelings of efficacy, empowerment, self-determination, even self-reliance, and hopefully let them reach goals without support in the future. And that is a kind of a nice bonus of these programs, is that the goals they have for the program, not necessarily for the individual, the goals that they have for the program can be very well defined, because they can give these youths some services, but their ultimate goal is to develop that adult identity so that they will not require the services or feel the need to have those services in the future. Now, another solution that we have seen a lot of research on is that, as we have been mentioning, in the past we really looked at adolescent as a as a stage of development, and then we looked at adult as a stage of development. And we see now that there's so much in the middle. I mean, some people, by all means, do go through those steps, but less so now than in the past. And yet our entire system is based upon having pediatric and adult services. It doesn't matter whether it's mental health care or going to the hospital or the emergency room. A lot of or social programs would be another example of this. They go right from pediatric to adult, although the individual themselves does not go directly from pediatric to adult states. And so our programs are. So one of the recommendations for solutions is to stop having just pediatric and adult services. And this is something that a lot of mental health professionals have the option of doing, and are taking that option now. For example, if you go to say an inpatient psychiatric facility, they don't just throw all the kids in the same room. They're not going to throw a 5-year-old in the same room with a 17-year-old. That wouldn't make sense. They wouldn't have anything in common with each other. And so they kind of split them up, and that makes perfect sense. They do the same thing even with adults. It is when they possibly can. You wouldn't want to put a 19-year-old with with somebody who's in their 70s having similar problems. They're not gonna have that same sense of identity. So the other person will feel like an other. So that's what's recommended, is to kind of split those up and have the middle ground of emerging adulthood be almost an official phase for various services, so that we don't go, right from, say, pediatric mental health, where you are just flat out not allowed to diagnose somebody with a personality disorder, to they're one day over 18, now you can say that they have a personality disorder. Now, another big solution that we have is prevention. Now, with so much of healthcare, whether it's mental health care or physical health care, prevention is such a key factor, and this is no exception. It is shown that people who, I mentioned identity formation in adolescent years, people that are going to go through extended periods of emerging adulthood tend to not go through the same identity formation during their adolescent years than people who aren't going to go through emerging adulthood. It's almost like they're putting off their identity formation because they don't want to identify as anything other than a child. And so kind of helping them form an identity, or a future identity, or a dream, or goals for what they would be when they're 40, can really make a huge difference in their lives. Now, the other thing that can make a huge difference in their lives are positive role models. Will make a huge difference in your lives. And you may remember that one of the problems that had occurred with emerging adulthood is the fact that people with unskilled parents are far more susceptible to not just emerging adulthood, but the various problems that arise during emerging adulthood. Adult support and mentorship can really they promote resilience. Resilience being the ability to react in a healthy way to stress and turmoil, and in a very flexible way. Furstenberg in 2002 did some research where he looked at young adolescents who were pregnant, and what he found was that the small proportion of them that had positive adult relationships had such a dramatic positive trajectory in their lives for the better, compared with the vast majority of those young women who did not have positive adult relationships. So it's a good example of the power of adult mentorship. So now let's go ahead and visit our 2 case studies again. Now that we've seen a bunch of problems and a bunch of solutions, and we can kind of revisit those and see specifically what problems that they have and what solutions that they have. And one thing that I want to stress here is that, some people focus on very specific problems that you would find in a particular developmental stage. But the problem with this developmental stage is the stage itself. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with having a couple years of emerging adulthood, but it's the lingering in this stage that becomes problematic, and what has been the focus of what I have been speaking of here in terms of solutions. So our 2 case studies again. First of all, you have Sean. Now, Sean had a lot of the behaviors that we spoke about in problems. There was a lot of risky, impulsive behavior. There was failure at school. There was failure at jobs. There was lack of direction, that feeling of in between. A lot of substance abuse that was continuing to hold Sean back, and ultimately, the solution that Sean found was through a variety of services. And I'll be putting down below some links to various services that are very beneficial for people essentially trying to get out of emerging adulthood. Now, the first thing that Sean did was he went to a place called Waypoint in New Hampshire, and they provide a variety of services to emerging adults. It's a wonderful program. I cannot speak highly enough for it. We also have Seacoast Youth Services for people more in the Portsmouth area. But Waypoint was able to provide Sean with a vast amount of resources when he was homeless. They provided him with basically a place to hang out, and he could get in out of the rain or whatever. They provide clothing. They provide blankets. They can provide tents. They provided him with a couple of tents and some recommendations as to different places to put it up, and so they did this as a method of supporting him through these times, because if you don't have any place to wash your clothes, then that's just one more problem that you're going to have. I mean, they didn't throw a lot of money at him, but Sean didn't need money. He needed support. And he was not in a position where he could live with other people because his violence and his drug abuse had gotten so bad at the time that it just didn't work well. He kind of needed to be on his own for a little while, but he did not feel up to that particular task. So they gave him all these resources, let him know where there was a soup kitchen nearby, where he could grab some food. And this is where Sean's case differs from Pat's significantly, because one of the programs that they offer is they offer job training, and then they offer housing services sometimes. And Sean did not qualify for the housing services because he wasn't able to get or maintain a job, and they're trying to, again, their focus is really on hope and helping the person get through that stage of emerging adulthood so they can come out on the other side as an adult. And that's just not the place that Sean was at the time. He wasn't trying to leave emerging adulthood. He was trying to bury himself in it. So that made him not qualify for the different housing programs that they had. They basically didn't want to stick. They didn't want somebody to have Sean as a roommate. he couldn't live with his own family. He couldn't live in their group housing either. Now, Pat, on the other hand, did wind up qualifying for basically all those programs. You have the laundry services, you have the the blankets. If there's any homeless problems, they can provide some tents and some locations to go, some soup kitchens. They wound up setting her up with basically a foster family for several months. So that she could be taken care of. Because if you remember right, one of the problems with Pat staying in emerging adulthood is she had the dream of knowing that one day she would be past emerging adulthood. She could imagine that and even strive for it, but she really did not feel able to care for herself, and felt that that she needed to be taken care of. So they were able to provide services for that because, again, she was such a hard worker. And that helps her be a positive role model on the other people who are in that particular group housing. Remember, positive role models make such a huge difference, which is why you would not want somebody like Sean in a case like that. You would want someone like Pat. Now, Pat obviously did not need the services of job placement. Very good job. Basically a career, not the one she wanted in the long run, but it was a fine career for the time, and so she did not need those career placement services. However, Sean, on the other hand, was able to use career placement services, and they were able to get him somebody that worked just with him. It was actually, he only had 4 clients, and so speaking to Sean, he was pestered by this guy several times a day and was really quite annoyed at having to deal with this guy over and over and over again. But it's that sort of persistence that you need to learn as an adult. This was a very good, positive mentorship with somebody who did know how to get a job, because this was something that Sean needed to learn. He just was not good at really putting himself out there, at not just making all the applications that he needed, but in following up on them. And eventually Sean was able to get a pretty decent job that made him happy. Perhaps not the thing he wants in the future, but was able to at least enjoy it at the time. So in summary, there are a lot of solutions, and the solutions come up very naturally as you go through these problems. But the problem itself is in getting someone to leave emerging adulthood and just successfully transition into the phase of adulthood. And that can be done with these really just wonderful positive youth development programs like Seacoast Youth Services or Waypoint Services. There's job placement programs. They have, even we were speaking of prevention, having programs like Big Brothers Big Sisters would be very good in a case probably more similar to Pat, where she didn't really have the skilled parents that Sean did, so she didn't really have that positive role model or multiple positive role models. So something like Big Brothers Big Sisters might help her quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and make a link down at the bottom for a variety of different websites to look into emerging adulthood, different articles to read if you're of a more scientific academic bent like I am, and then just different places to reach out to find some of these solutions.